On a rain-soaked interstate outside Denver, Eli Navarro pulled his battered Honda over to help a stranded driver. He had no idea that changing one tire would change 2 lives forever. The woman standing beside the disabled Tesla was Alexa Cho, CEO of a billion-dollar electric vehicle company about to go public. She was late for the most important gala of her career. Her phone was dead, and her carefully constructed world was about to collide with a widowed mechanic who measured success in bedtime stories read and school lunches packed. When viral photos of the soaked CEO arriving at her IPO celebration in a dented minivan hit social media, both their lives took an unexpected turn. What started as a simple act of kindness became a corporate initiative that would challenge everything they thought they knew about success, family, and love. But would their unlikely partnership survive the ruthless world of high-stakes business and bitter custody battles? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry pierced the pre-dawn darkness at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Eli Navarro needed to wake up. He'd trained himself to rise just ahead of the buzzera, small victory in a life where small victories mattered. His calloused hand found the snooze button with practiced precision, silencing the noise before it could disturb Leo's sleep through the thin apartment walls. Eli's feet hit the cold linoleum floor, and he padded quietly to the kitchen, where yesterday's coffee grounds waited in the filter. The familiar ritual of brewing coffee, scrambling eggs, and buttering toast created a rhythm that steadied his nerves for another day of uncertainty. Through the kitchen window, Denver's skyline caught the first hints of dawn, glass towers reflecting promises he'd stopped believing in years ago. "Dad?" Leo's voice drifted from the hallway, thick with sleep. "Morning, buddy. You've got 10 more minutes." Eli's voice carried the gentle authority of a father who'd learned to balance firmness with tenderness. At 34, he'd been widowed for 3 years, and single parenthood had taught him that consistency was love made visible. Leo shuffled into the kitchen, his dark hair sticking up in directions that defied gravity. At 9, he possessed his mother's curious eyes and Eli's stubborn china combination that melted hearts and tested patience in equal measure. He clutched a wrinkled folder against his chest, the corners soft from countless small fingers. "Mrs. Patterson wants to see my math homework," Leo said, settling into his chair. "She said I'm getting better at fractions." Eli's chest tightened with pride. Leo's homework folder-worn manila paper, held together with clear tape, represented more than assignments. It was evidence of bedtime tutoring sessions, of problems worked through at the kitchen table while Eli's eyes burned from fatigue. Each completed worksheet was a small rebellion against the circumstances that threatened to overwhelm them. "That's my boy." Eli ruffled Leo's hair and placed a plate of eggs before him. "Eat up. Miguel's picking you up in 20 minutes. Their neighbor, Miguel Rodriguez, had become an unexpected Blesinga retired teacher who walked Leo to school each morning, refusing Eli's offers of payment. "We look out for each other," Miguel always said, his weathered hands gentle on Leo's shoulders. "That's what community means." Eli's phone buzzed with the day's first ride request. A businessman needed a pickup from the downtown Marriott to DIA. The fare would barely cover gas, but every dollar counted. He glanced at the stack of bills on the counter: electric, water, Leo's school lunch account, and the lawyer's retainer fee that grew larger each month. The lawyer, Margaret Chen, had been direct during their last meeting. "Eli, your ex-in-laws have resources you don't. They're questioning your stability, your ability to provide. One misstep, and they'll use it against you." Sandra's parents had never forgiven Eli for their daughter's death, as if loving her hadn't been enough to save her from the cancer that took her at 28. Now they wanted Leo, convinced that their suburban house and retirement savings could offer him more than his father's cramped apartment and irregular income. "Dad, you look worried." Leo's observation cut through Eli's spiraling thoughts. "Just thinking about work stuff, buddy. Nothing for you to worry about." But Leo's eyes held too much wisdom for 9 years. He'd inherited his mother's ability to read people, to sense the undercurrents adults tried to hide. "Are we going to be okay?" Eli knelt beside his son's chair, taking small hands in his own. "We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be great. You know why? Because we're a team. Because we're a team." Eli's voice carried conviction he didn't always feel. And teams stick together, no matter what. Across town, in a glass tower that scraped the belly of morning clouds, Alexa Cho stood at her office window, watching the city wake up below. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman who'd learned to armor herself in tailored suits and measured expressions. At 31, she'd built Volta Motors from a garage startup into a company worth $800 million on paper, but the paper felt increasingly fragile. Her assistant, David Kim, knocked and entered with coffee that cost more than most people's hourly wage. "The board wants to move up the IPO timeline," he said, setting the cup on her desk. "They're concerned about market conditions." Alexa's jaw tightened. The board's 7 men in expensive suits who'd invested in her company but never understood her vision treated her like a promising employee rather than the founder and CEO. They saw profit margins where she saw the possibility of transforming transportation, of creating something meaningful. "Tell them we launch when we're ready, not when they're nervous." Her voice carried the steel that had intimidated competitors and inspired employees. "The technology isn't just about making cars, it's about making a difference." But even as she spoke, doubt crept in. The past month had been a blur of presentations to investors who saw her as a novelty, young Asian woman who'd somehow stumbled into success. They asked about her personal life, her family, her plans for marriage and children, questions they'd never posed to a male CEO. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Haven't heard from you in 2 weeks. Are you eating enough? Your father worries." Alexa's parents had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they'd never had. Her father worked 16-hour days at a dry cleaner. Her mother took in sewing to pay for Alexa's engineering degree. They'd never said it directly, but Alexa knew they saw her success as validation of their struggles, their decision to leave everything behind in South Korea. The weight of their expectations pressed against her chest. She'd built walls around herself, convinced that vulnerability was weakness, that showing emotion would give her critics ammunition. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this, she wondered if she'd built the walls so high that nothing could get in. Not love, not genuine connection, not the simple human warmth her parents had shown her before ambition consumed everything. David cleared his throat. "Also, the Chronicle wants to do a feature on successful women in tech. They're calling it Breaking the Glass Ceiling. Schedule it for next week." Alexa turned from the window, her reflection dissolving into the brightening sky. "And David, make sure they focus on the company, not my personal life." "Of course, Ms. Cho." She sank into her chair, surrounded by the trappings of success awards, photos with politicians, magazine covers featuring her serious expression. But the office felt empty, sterile, like a beautiful cage she'd built around herself. Her computer screen displayed the morning's reports, production numbers, market analysis, competitor intelligence. Everything was proceeding according to plan, yet something felt hollow. She'd achieved everything she'd dreamed of, so why did success taste like unseasoned rice? Back in his Honda Civic, Eli navigated Denver's morning traffic with the patience of someone who'd learned to find peace in small spaces. His dashboard displayed the ride-share app's glowing map, each potential passenger a story he'd never fully know. He'd driven teachers heading to school, nurses finishing night shifts, executives rushing to meetings that would determine other people's futures. The businessman at the Marriott climbed into the back seat, immediately pulling out his phone to begin the day's first conference call. Eli adjusted the rearview mirror and caught sight of his own reflection-tired eyes, stubble he'd shaved during his lunch break, a face that carried the weight of responsibility without complaint. "Traffic's moving well today," Eli offered, but the passenger was already deep in conversation about quarterly projections and market penetration. Eli drove in practiced silence, his mind wandering to Leo's upcoming school play, to the gas bill due next week, to the possibility of picking up extra shifts over the weekend. He thought about Sandra, about the dreams they'd shared before cancer rewrote their story. She'd believed in him, seen potential he'd never glimpsed in himself. "You're going to do great things, Eli," she'd whispered during one of their last conversations. "You just don't know it yet." The ride ended at the airport, and Eli collected his fare, plus a modest tip. Back on the road, he accepted another pickup request, then another, each journey a small chapter in the larger story of survival and hope. At noon, he parked outside Leo's school for lunch, a volunteer position that let him see his son's face in the middle of the day. Leo bounded over, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson said my fractions test was almost perfect." "Almost perfect?" Eli raised an eyebrow in mock concern. "Okay, it was perfect, but I didn't want to brag." They sat together on a bench, sharing sandwiches and watching other children play. Leo's laughter mixed with the sounds of childhood joy, and for a moment Eli felt wealthy beyond measure. These moments, simple, unguarded, real, were worth more than any stock option or corner office. "Dad, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Eli chuckled. "I think I'm already grown up, buddy." "But what do you want to be? Like if you could be anything?" The question hung in the air between them. Eli thought about his answer, about the dreams he'd shelved when reality demanded attention. "I want to be the kind of person who makes a difference. Maybe not in a big way, but in a way that matters." "You already do that," Leo said with the certainty of childhood. "You help people every day." As afternoon shadows lengthened, Eli prepared for his evening shift. The weekend mechanic work supplemented his driving income, and tonight he'd spend hours beneath car hoods, his hands deep in engines that needed fixing. It was honest work, work that produced tangible results: a car that ran, a problem solved, a customer satisfied. Neither Eli nor Alexa could have predicted that their paths would intersect on a rain-soaked highway, that a simple act of kindness would become the catalyst for everything that followed. They lived in the same city but different worlds, separated by circumstance and assumption, united only by the human capacity for compassion that waited, dormant, for the right moment to bloom. The storm that would bring them together was already gathering strength in the western sky, dark clouds pregnant with possibility and change. The storm arrived, with the fury of nature unleashed, turning Denver's highways into rivers of uncertainty. Eli had dropped Leo at Miguel's for the evening sleepover that would let him work late without worry, and now found himself driving through conditions that made veteran rideshare drivers park and wait for clear skies. But Eli couldn't afford to wait. The mechanic shop had called with an emergency repair that would pay triple overtime, and every dollar was precious. He gripped the steering wheel of his Honda, windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm against the deluge, visibility reduced to mere yards ahead. Interstate 25 stretched empty before him, most sensible drivers having sought shelter. The radio crackled with weather warnings and traffic updates, but Eli pressed on, his headlights cutting through sheets of rain that seemed to rise from the asphalt as much as fall from the sky. That's when he saw her. A figure stood beside a Tesla, Moon Doe S, its sleek lines incongruous against the storm's chaos. Hazard lights blinked like a distress signal, and even through the rain, Eli could see the woman's designer coat was no match for nature's assault. She held something in her handophone, he realized, shaking it, with the futile hope that technology might overcome the elements. Eli's first instinct was to drive past. His practical mind catalogued the risks, stopping on a dangerous highway, approaching a stranger, losing precious time. But Sandra's voice echoed in his memory, words she'd spoken during their first date. "The world doesn't need more people who look away, it needs people who pull over." He activated his hazard lights and eased onto the shoulder, parking 20 feet behind the Tesla. The rain drummed against his roof like impatient fingers, and he could see the woman turn toward his approaching headlights, her posture a mix of hope and wariness. Eli grabbed his rain jacket from the back seat and stepped into the storm, The wind hit him like a physical force, and within seconds, water found every gap in his clothing. He jogged toward the stranded motorist, his work boots splashing through puddles that reflected the chaos above. "Are you okay?" he called out, raising his voice above the storm's roar. The woman turned fully toward him, and Eli's breath caught. Even drenched and disheveled, she possessed an elegance that seemed to radiate from within. Her dark hair was plastered to her head, and her makeup had surrendered to the rain, but her eyes, intelligent, determined, slightly desperate, held him in place. "My tire blew," she said, her voice carrying an accent that spoke of educated precision. "And my phone died right before I could call for help." Eli looked at the Tesla's rear tire, completely flat and likely damaged beyond repair. "When did it happen?" "About 20 minutes ago. I was supposed to be at the Marriott downtown an hour ago." She gestured helplessly at her phone, its black screen reflecting their predicament. "My driver was supposed to meet me, but your phone's dead, and you're stuck." Eli nodded, understanding her situation with the clarity of someone who'd lived on the edge of disaster. "I can change your tire if you have a spare." She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't even know if there is a spare. This has never happened before." Of course it hadn't. Eli could see from her posture, her clothes, the way she held herself, that unexpected problems were usually handled by other people. But the storm had stripped away those protections, leaving her as vulnerable as anyone else. "Let me take a look." He moved to the Tesla's trunk, grateful when she pressed something that popped it open. Inside, he found the spare tire compartment, complete with tools that looked like they'd never been used. "You're in luck. Everything's here." For the next 30 minutes, Eli worked in conditions that would have sent most people seeking shelter. The rain soaked through his jacket, his jeans, his socks. His hands grew numb from the cold, and the lug nuts fought him with mechanical stubbornness. But he'd changed tires in worse weather, and muscle memory guided him through the process. The woman she'd introduced herself as Alexa, though she seemed hesitant to offer more, watched him work with fascination. She held a small flashlight from her emergency kit, its beam dancing across his movements as he wrestled with the flat tire. "You don't have to do this," she said at one point, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "I could call someone when my phone charges." "When would that be?" Eli asked, not looking up from his work. "And who would you call? Emergency services are probably overwhelmed tonight." She fell silent, and he sensed she was processing the reality of her situation. People with money, with resources, with assistants and drivers, rarely faced the raw immediacy of being truly stranded. But the storm had reduced her to the same fundamental need as anyone else, the kindness of strangers. "There," Eli said finally, tightening the last lug nut. "That should get you where you need to go, but you'll want to replace this spare soon. It's not meant for long-term use." He stood, wiping his hands on his soaked jeans, and found Alexa staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but something deeper, as if she was seeing something unexpected in the middle of the storm. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to. What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Eli replied automatically. "Just glad I could help." But Alexa shook her head. "No, really. You stopped in dangerous conditions. You're completely soaked, and you've probably lost money by being here instead of—" She gestured at his car. "You're a rideshare driver." Among other things, Eli felt a familiar defensive tightness in his chest. "Look, you don't owe me anything. Just be safe out there." He turned to go, but her voice stopped him. "Wait, what's your name?" "Eli. Eli Navarro." "Eli, I'm Alexa Cho, and I have a problem that maybe you can help with." She explained her situation quickly. The gala, the dead phone, the driver who couldn't be reached. The event was crucial, she said, something about investors and presentations that would determine her company's future. Eli listened, understanding that her world operated on schedules and expectations he'd never experienced. "I know it's a lot to ask," she concluded, "but could you give me a ride? I'll pay you whatever you normally charge, plus—" "You don't need to pay me extra," Eli interrupted, "but I should warn you, my car isn't exactly—" "I don't care what your car looks like," Alexa said with surprising firmness. "You're the only person who stopped to help me tonight. That means something." 20 minutes later, Eli found himself navigating downtown Denver with a passenger unlike any he'd ever carried. Alexa sat in his passenger seat, her designer coat draped over the back, her appearance gradually recovering from the storm's assault. She'd used the car's overhead light and mirror to repair her makeup, transforming herself from bedraggled motorist to polished executive with skills that seemed almost magical. "Tell me about yourself," she said as they drove through the city's glittering heart. "Do you have family?" "A son, Leo. He's 9. Eli's voice carried the warmth it always held when discussing his boy. "He's staying with a neighbor tonight so I could work late." "And your wife?" "She passed away 3 years ago." Eli's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Cancer." "I'm sorry." Alexa's voice carried genuine sympathy. "That must be incredibly difficult." "We manage. Leo's a good kid. Smarter than his old man, that's for sure." They talked during the ride, tentative conversations that revealed more than either expected. Alexa spoke about her company, her frustrations with investors who saw her as a curiosity rather than a leader. Eli shared his struggles with custody concerns, his determination to provide for Leo despite limited resources. "You know what I realized tonight?" Alexa said as they approached the Marriott. "I've spent so much time building my career that I forgot what it feels like to depend on someone else's kindness." "Everyone needs help sometimes," Eli replied. "The trick is being willing to accept it." As they pulled into the hotel's circular drive, Alexa noticed the photographers first. "Oh no," she whispered. "The media's here." Eli saw them too, a cluster of people with cameras and notebooks, waiting for the city's elite to arrive at the gala. His battered Honda looked absurdly out of place among the luxury cars and limousines. "I can drop you at the side entrance," he offered, but Alexa was already checking her appearance in the visor mirror. "No," she said with sudden determination. "I'm not ashamed of getting help from a decent person." She stepped out of the car with her head held high, her posture radiating confidence despite her earlier vulnerability. Eli watched her walk toward the hotel entrance, her heels clicking against the wet pavement, and felt something shift in his chestnut attraction. Exactly, but recognition of someone who faced their challenges with grace. The photographers noticed her immediately, their cameras flashing as they captured the unusual sight of a CEO arriving in a working man's car. Alexa paused at the entrance, turned back toward Eli, and raised her hand in a brief wave of acknowledgement. Later, as Eli drove home through streets that sparkled with reflected light, he thought about the evening's unexpected turn. He'd helped someone in need, accepted no payment beyond the normal fare, and done what felt right. It was a simple transaction, the kind that happened every day without notice or consequence. He had no way of knowing that the photographer's pictures would be online within hours, that social media would seize on the story of the CEO and the rideshare driver, that his simple act of kindness would become a viral moment that would change both their lives forever. The storm was passing, leaving behind clean air and fresh possibilities. But sometimes, storms don't just wash things away, they also wash new opportunities into view, carried on currents of compassion that flow deeper than anyone imagines. The morning sun painted Denver's skyline in shades of gold and possibility, but Eli Navarro felt anything but golden as he stared at his phone screen. The notification had arrived at 6:23 a.m., a digital intrusion that shattered his quiet morning routine. "Dad, you're famous." Leo's voice carried excitement and confusion in equal measure as he burst into the kitchen, Miguel's phone clutched in his small hands. The screen displayed a photograph that made Eli's stomach drop. Alexa Cho stepping out of his Honda Civic, her elegant figure framed by the Marriott's gleaming entrance, while his weathered car sat in the background like a visual punchline. The headline read, "Volta Motors CEO arrives at EPO Gala in battered Honda driver shortage or publicity stunt." Miguel appeared in the doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. "Eli, you need to see this. It's everywhere." Eli took the phone with hands that trembled slightly. The article was brief but devastating, painting the previous night's events as either a calculated PR move or evidence of Alexa's poor judgment. The comment section buzzed with speculation, mockery, and the casual cruelty of anonymous voices. "She's lost her mind," one commenter wrote. "No serious CEO would be caught dead in that rust bucket." "Probably staged for sympathy votes," suggested another. "Rich people love playing dress-up as regular folk." But it was the third comment that made Eli's blood run cold. "Someone should check if that driver has proper insurance. Looks like the kind of guy who cuts corners." Leo pressed closer to his father, sensing the tension without understanding its source. "Dad, why are people saying mean things about your car?" Eli's phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number, then another, and another. The media had found him, and they wanted their pound of flesh from the story that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. "Miguel, can you take Leo to school? I need to deal with this." "Of course, Mijo. But Ellie, maybe don't answer those calls until you've had time to think." Too late. Eli's phone was already pressed to his ear, and a woman's voice, sharp with professional hunger, filled the line. "Mr. Navarro, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'd like to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Alexa Cho." "There's no relationship," Eli said quickly. "I just helped her change a tire." "But you gave her a ride to a major corporate event. Are you saying this wasn't planned?" The question felt like a trap, each word weighted with implication. Eli found himself stammering, trying to explain the simple truth of the situation, while the reporter's questions grew more pointed, more invasive. "What's your background, Mr. Navarro? Do you have any connection to Volta Motors? Any business relationship with Ms. Cho?" "I'm a rideshare driver. I work part-time as a mechanic. I've never met her before last night." "And yet she trusted you enough to get in your car during a storm. Some people might find that suspicious." Eli hung up, his hands shaking with frustration and a growing sense of dread. The phone immediately rang again, and he turned it off, suddenly understanding how quickly a good deed could become a nightmare. Across town, Alexa Cho stood in her glass-walled office, surrounded by laptops, displaying the digital wildfire that had consumed her morning. Her usual composure had cracked, revealing glimpses of the uncertainty beneath her executive armor. "How bad is it?" she asked David Kim, who looked like he'd slept in his clothes. "Bad," David replied without his usual diplomatic cushioning. "The stock opened down 3%. The board's calling an emergency meeting, and the media's treating this like you've lost your mind." Alexa scrolled through the coverage, watching as her carefully constructed image dissolved into a series of unflattering photographs and speculative headlines. Social media had seized on the story with the gleeful malice of a digital mob, turning her moment of vulnerability into content for collective mockery. "CEO gets ride from random dude. What's next, hitchhiking?" Volta Motors stock falls as boss shows. Questionable judgment. From Tesla to Honda, Alexa Cho's downward spiral. But buried among the criticism were other voices quieter, more thoughtful responses that recognized something different in the photograph. A few commenters praised her for accepting help gracefully, for showing humanity in an industry known for its arrogance. "At least she said thank you," one person wrote. "Most executives would have pretended it never happened." "Maybe she's just a decent person who got caught in the rain," suggested another. When did accepting help become shameful? Alexa's phone buzzed with a call from her mother, and she answered with the desperate hope that someone in her life might offer understanding instead of judgment. "Alexa, yeah, I saw the news. Are you okay?" Her mother's voice carried the worried tone that had followed Alexa through every challenge of her adult life. "I'm fine, Mom. It's just things got complicated." "You helped someone, and someone helped you. This is complicated?" Her mother's simple logic cut through the digital noise, reminding Alexa of values that had somehow gotten lost in the pursuit of success. Her parents had built their lives on mutual aid, on the understanding that strength came from community, not isolation. "The investors are upset," Alexa explained. "They think I showed poor judgment." "Did you get home safely?" "Yes, but—" "Then the judgment was fine. The rest is just noise." After the call ended, Alexa sat in her chair, staring at the city beyond her window. Somewhere out there, Eli Navarro was probably dealing with his own version of this chaos, unprepared for the spotlight that had suddenly found him. She thought about his quiet competence during the tire change, his genuine concern for her safety, the way he'd refused extra payment for extraordinary kindness. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Cho, the board meeting is in 10 minutes. Alexa straightened her shoulders, preparing for a battle she'd never expected to fight. But as she gathered her papers and checked her appearance in the mirror, an idea began to form, dangerous, unprecedented, but possibly brilliant. What if she didn't apologize for the photograph? What if she embraced it instead? The elevator ride to the boardroom felt like a descent into hostile territory. 7 men, in expensive suits, sat around a polished table, their faces displaying various degrees of concern, disappointment, and barely concealed panic. These were the investors who'd believed in her vision, who'd trusted her with their money, and who now saw that trust reflected in a 3% stock drop. "Alexa, we need to discuss damage control," said Richard Pemberton, the board's chairman and lead investor. His voice carried the patronizing tone she'd learned to expect from men who saw her success as an interesting experiment rather than earned achievement. "The market's responding negatively to the coverage," added Thomas Chen, the venture capitalist who'd insisted on joining the board despite his complete lack of automotive experience. "We need to distance ourselves from this narrative." "What narrative?" Alexa asked, settling into her chair with calculated calm. "The narrative that our CEO makes impulsive decisions, that she's lost touch with appropriate behavior for someone in her position." Richard's words carried the weight of accumulated judgment. "The photograph suggests a lack of judgment that makes investors nervous." "The photograph suggests that I accepted help when I needed it," Alexa replied. "Since when is that controversial?" "Since you're the CEO of a company about to go public," Thomas interjected. "Image matters, perception matters, and right now the perception is that you're unpredictable." Alexa looked around the table, recognizing the familiar pattern of men explaining her own experience to her, telling her what she should have done differently, how she should have handled a situation they'd never faced. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying a steel that made several board members sit straighter, "I want to tell you about the man who helped me last night." She spoke about Eli's competence, his professionalism, his refusal to accept extra payment. She described the storm, the isolation, the genuine fear she'd felt when her phone died, and she realized how completely unprepared she was for a simple emergency. "This man stopped in dangerous conditions to help a stranger," she concluded. "He asked for nothing in return. He treated me with respect and dignity, and now he's being attacked by the media for the crime of being decent." "That's all very touching," Richard said, his tone suggesting it was anything but it doesn't change the fact that the market is responding negatively. We need to issue a statement clarifying the situation, perhaps explaining that it was an emergency measure that won't be repeated. Or, Alexa said, leaning forward, we could do something unprecedented. The room fell silent, and she could feel the weight of their attention, their skepticism, their growing concern about the woman they'd entrusted with their investment. "What if we didn't apologize?" she continued. "What if we embraced what happened? What if we used this moment to show that Volta Motors isn't just another tech company, but a company that values human connection over corporate theater?" "What exactly are you suggesting?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with worry. Alexa smiled, and for the first time since seeing the photograph, she felt like herself again, the entrepreneur who'd built something from nothing, who'd never been afraid to take calculated risks. "I'm suggesting we turn this into an opportunity," she said, "and I know exactly how to do it." The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m., giving Alexa exactly 4 hours to craft a response that would either save her company or destroy it completely. She dismissed the board's concerns with the confidence of someone who'd built an empire on calculated risks. But now, Alone in her office, doubt crept in like morning fog. Her computer screen displayed the draft of what would become Volta Motors' most important press release, each word carefully chosen to transform disaster into opportunity. The cursor blinked at her, waiting for the final sentence that would commit her to a path from which there would be no return. "David," she called to her assistant, "get me everything you can find on Eli Navarro. Background, family, employment history. And David's want the real story, not the media speculation." While David worked his research magic, Alexa walked to her window, watching the city pulse with life below. Somewhere in those streets, Eli was probably trying to understand how changing a tire had become a public spectacle. She thought about his quiet dignity, the way he'd focused on solving her problem without seeking recognition or reward. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Your father says you should follow your heart, not the stock price. He's usually right about these things." 20 minutes later, David returned with a folder that painted a picture of a man living with quiet honor in difficult circumstances. Eli Navarro, 34, widowed father of one son. Clean driving record, no criminal history, part-time mechanic with excellent customer reviews, financial struggles but no bankruptcy, custody arrangement but no court disputes. "There's something else," David said, his voice carrying unusual emotion. "I found this." He handed her a printout of a local newspaper article from 6 months ago. The headline read, "Local man organizes neighborhood watch after break-ins." The accompanying photo showed Eli talking to a group of residents, his arm around Leo's shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera. "He started a community safety program after his elderly neighbor was robbed," David explained. "Organized patrol schedules, installed security lights, even helped fix broken locks for people who couldn't afford repairs." Alexa stared at the photograph, seeing something in Eli's expression that resonated with her own motivations. Here was someone who saw problems and worked to solve them, who understood that success meant lifting others up rather than climbing over them. "David, I need you to reach out to Mr. Navarro. Tell him I'd like to speak with him before the press conference, and David, be gentle. He's not used to any of this." An hour later, Eli sat in the reception area of Volta Motors headquarters, feeling like an imposter in a world of glass and steel. His best clothes khakis and a button-down shirt that Leo had helped him iron felt inadequate among the sleek surroundings and purposeful bustle of corporate life. Leo had insisted on coming, despite Eli's protests. "Dad, you helped her. That makes you a hero. Heroes don't hide." Now his son sat beside him, wide-eyed at the building's impressive lobby, whispering questions about the electric car displays and the wall-mounted screens showing production footage from Volta's factories. "Mr. Navarro," David Kim approached with a warmth that immediately put Eli at ease. "Ms. Cho is ready to see you. And this must be Leo." Leo straightened in his chair, extending his hand with the formal politeness Eli had taught him. "Nice to meet you, sir." David smiled, clearly charmed. "The pleasure's mine. Would you like to see our design studio while your father meets with Ms. Cho?" The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to another world. Eli had never been in a building this modern, this expensive, this removed from the practical concerns of everyday life. He thought about the mortgage payment due next week, the custody lawyer's bills, the constant calculation of dollars and cents that governed his existence. The elevator doors opened to reveal Alexa Cho, but not the polished executive he'd expected. She'd traded her usual suit for dark jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger, more approachable. "Eli," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I know this whole situation must be overwhelming." "It's not exactly what I expected when I stopped to help someone change a tire," Eli replied, accepting her handshake and noting the strength in her grip. "Can I get you coffee? Water? Something stronger?" She gestured toward her office, and Eli noticed that her windows offered a view of the mountains beyond the city. Coffee would be good. As they settled into chairs, arranged more like a living room than a corporate meeting space, Alexa studied Eli with the same analytical intensity she brought to business problems. But instead of seeing a liability or a complication, she saw something that reminded her of her own father, a man who worked with his hands, who took pride in solving problems, who measured success in terms of family and community rather than stock prices. "I need to ask you something," she said, leaning forward, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." Eli nodded, his coffee untouched. "Are you prepared for your life to change?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Eli couldn't fully grasp. "I don't understand." "In about an hour, I'm going to hold a press conference. I'm going to tell the world that what happened last night wasn't a mistake or a lapse in judgment. I'm going to say it was a reminder of what really matters: people helping people, community over corporate image, authentic connection over artificial barriers." She paused, watching his face carefully. "And then I'm going to announce that Volta Motors is launching a new initiative. We're going to provide discounted electric vehicle maintenance and charging services to single parents and low-income families. We're going to partner with local mechanics and community organizations to make sustainable transportation accessible to everyone." Eli's mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what she was describing. "That sounds like a good program, but I don't see what it has to do with me. I want you to be the public face of this initiative. I want to hire you as our community outreach coordinator, our connection to the people we're trying to serve." Alexa's voice carried a conviction that made Eli sit straighter. "I want you to help us build something meaningful. I don't know anything about corporate programs or public relations or... You know about being a single parent. You know about struggling to make ends meet while trying to do right by your family. You know about community, about helping neighbors, about the kind of practical problems our initiative is designed to solve." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "I've spent my career building technology, but I've forgotten how to build connections with people. You could teach me." Eli thought about Leo, about the custody battle, about the bills stacked on his kitchen counter. He thought about the newspaper article David had probably shown Alexa, about the neighborhood watch program that had grown from his frustration with feeling powerless to protect the people he cared about. "If I say yes, what happens to my son? This media attention, the scrutiny, he's just a kid." "We'll protect him," Alexa said firmly. "Part of the program is providing support for working parents. Leo would have access to after-school programs, tutoring, summer camps. We'd make sure he's shielded from media exposure while still being proud of his father's work. And if I say no, then you go back to your life and I figure out another way to make this work." "But Eli..." She paused, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "Last night, you stopped to help someone you didn't know, in dangerous conditions, without expecting anything in return. That's exactly the kind of person I want to work with." Eli stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city where he'd spent his adult life, driving other people to their destinations. He thought about Sandra, about the dreams they'd shared, about the conversation they'd had when Leo was a baby about making the world better for their son. "What would my job actually involve?" "Working with community organizations to identify families who could benefit from our services. Helping design programs that actually meet people's needs rather than corporate assumptions about what they need. Being the voice of experience in our boardroom discussions." "Your board would listen to a mechanic?" "They'd listen to our community outreach coordinator," Alexa corrected. "And if they didn't, they'd answer to me." Eli turned back to face her, seeing determination in her expression that reminded him of his own resolve when fighting for Leo's future. "There's something you should know about me. I'm not good at corporate politics. I say what I think, and I don't always say it diplomatically." "Good," Alexa replied. "I have enough diplomats. I need someone who'll tell me the truth. And if this whole thing backfires, if the media turns against both of us, then we'll figure it out together. But Eli, if we don't try, if we let fear make our decisions for us, then we're not the people I think we are." Eli thought about Leo's question from that morning about heroes not hiding. He thought about his son's excitement at seeing the design studio, about the possibility of providing him with opportunities that had never existed before. I'll need to think about salary, benefits, how this affects my custody situation. Of course, we'll work out all the details, but right now, I need to know if you're willing to take this leap with me. Eli extended his hand, and Alexa stood to shake it. Let's change some lives, he said. An hour later, Eli found himself standing beside Alexa at a podium, facing a room full of reporters and cameras. His hands were steady, his voice was clear, and his son watched from the side of the room with pride shining in his eyes. Sometimes, Alexa was saying, the best business decisions are the ones that feel most human. Yesterday, Eli Navarro reminded me that success isn't just about profit margins or stock prices. It's about people helping people, communities supporting each other, and companies that remember their responsibility to serve more than just shareholders. She turned to Eli, and he saw in her expression the same determination he'd recognized in the storm, the refusal to let circumstances define possibilities. Today, Volta Motors is announcing the Community Care Initiative, she continued. And I can't think of anyone better to lead it than the man who stopped in a storm to help a stranger, who asked for nothing in return, and who reminded me why I started this company in the first place. The cameras flashed, the reporters scribbled notes, and Eli felt his life pivot toward a future he'd never imagined. Somewhere in the audience, his phone buzzed with a text from Miguel. "Mijo, Sandra would be so proud." As the press conference ended and the reporters filed out, Alexa touched Eli's arm gently. "No regrets?" "Ask me in a year," Eli replied, but he was smiling. "Deal," she said. And he realized that this was how partnerships began, not with contracts or negotiations, but with two people deciding to trust each other enough to build something neither could create alone. 3 weeks into his new role as Community Outreach Coordinator, Eli Navarro still felt like an actor who'd wandered onto the wrong stage. The business card, in his wallet-crisp white paper with Volta Motors embossed in elegant silver, seemed to belong to someone else. Someone who understood corporate hierarchies and quarterly projections and the subtle art of boardroom politics. His first official day had begun with a tour of the headquarters, led by David Kim, who'd proven to be an unexpected ally in navigating the company's complex social dynamics. They'd walked through departments filled with engineers and designers, marketing specialists and financial analysts, all of them brilliant in ways that made Eli acutely aware of his own educational limitations. "The key thing to remember," David had explained as they stood outside the main conference room, "is that most of these people have never worked a day outside the tech industry. They mean well, but they don't understand the communities we're trying to serve. And they're supposed to listen to me? They're supposed to listen to their new Community Outreach Coordinator," David corrected with a slight smile. "Title matters here. Use it." Now, as Eli sat in his first official board meeting, he understood what David meant. The conference room was a monument to corporate success, floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat 20, and screens displaying real-time data about everything from production numbers to social media sentiment. Richard Pemberton, the board chairman, was explaining the Community Care Initiative's preliminary budget when he paused to address Eli directly. "Mr. Navarro, we're curious about your perspective on the proposed vehicle maintenance subsidies. From a practical standpoint, do you think the target demographics will actually utilize these services?" The question felt like a test, and Eli sensed that his answer would determine whether he'd be treated as a colleague or a curiosity. He thought about the single parents he'd met during his rideshare days, the families who postponed car repairs until emergencies forced their hands, the constant calculation of priorities that governed life on the financial margins. "With respect, Mr. Pemberton, I think you're asking the wrong question," Eli replied, his voice steady despite the weight of attention focused on him. "The question isn't whether they'll utilize the services. The question is whether we'll make the services accessible enough for them to utilize." A subtle tension filled the room, and Eli could feel the board members reassessing him. He wasn't the grateful recipient of corporate charity they'd expected. He was someone with opinions, with experience they lacked, with the confidence to challenge their assumptions. "Could you elaborate?" asked Thomas Chen, his tone carefully neutral. "Most working parents don't have time to research electric vehicle benefits or navigate complicated application processes," Eli explained. "They need help that meets them where they are at. Community centers, schools, places they already go. They need simple language, flexible scheduling, and most importantly, they need to trust that this isn't just another corporate program that will disappear when the publicity value runs out." Alexa leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest. "What would real accessibility look like?" "Mobile service units," Eli said, warming to the subject. "Bring the maintenance to neighborhoods instead of expecting people to come to us. Partner with existing community organizations that already have trust relationships, and hire locally trained people from these communities to do the work, so they're not just receiving help, they're providing it." The room fell silent, and Eli wondered if he'd overstepped. But then Richard nodded slowly. "That's significantly more complex than our initial proposal." "Most things worth doing are complex," Eli replied. "The question is whether we want to do something meaningful or just something that looks good in press releases." After the meeting, Alexa walked with Eli toward the elevator, her pace measured and thoughtful. "You realize you just challenged our entire approach in front of the board." "I figured that's why you hired me," Eli said, pressing the elevator button, "to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear." "It is. But I should warn you, not everyone appreciates that kind of directness. Some of the executives see you as an outsider who doesn't understand how business works." "And what do you see me as?" The elevator arrived, and they stepped inside together. Alexa was quiet for a moment, studying his reflection in the polished steel doors. "I see you as someone who remembers that businesses are supposed to serve people, not the other way around." The next few days brought a crash course in corporate culture that tested Eli's patience and principles in equal measure. He attended strategy sessions where executives debated the optics of community outreach, budget meetings where human need was reduced to line items and cost projections, and planning sessions where genuine help was carefully calculated for maximum PR impact. But there were also moments that reminded him why he'd said yes to Alexa's offer. He met Maria Santos, a single mother of 3 who'd been struggling with her car's failing transmission, unable to afford repairs that would cost 2 weeks' salary. Through the pilot program, Volta's partner mechanic not only fixed her car but trained her teenage son in basic automotive maintenance, giving him marketable skills and restoring her family's mobility. "You don't understand what this means," Maria had told Eli during a follow-up visit, tears streaming down her face. "I was going to lose my job. My kids were going to have to change schools. You saved our whole life." These encounters sustained Eli through the corporate frustrations, reminding him that behind every policy discussion and budget allocation were real families facing real challenges. He began building a database of success stories, documenting not just the financial impact of the program, but its human cost and benefit. Leo had adapted to the changes in their circumstances with the resilience of childhood, though Eli could see him processing the new dynamics in his own quiet way. Their apartment remained the same, but Leo now attended an after-school program at Volta's headquarters, where he had access to tutoring, art classes, and technology that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. "Dad, Ms. Cho taught me about electric motors today," Leo announced one evening as they sat down to dinner. "She knows everything about how cars work." "She's pretty smart," Eli agreed, noting the admiration in his son's voice. "She said her dad taught her about engines when she was my age, and she said you remind her of him." Eli paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "She said that?" "Yeah. She said her dad always fixed things for people in their neighborhood, even when they couldn't pay him, like you do." That weekend, as Eli worked in his home garage habit, he maintained, despite his new corporate role, he reflected on the unexpected parallels between his life and Alexa's. Both of them had been shaped by parents who valued service over self-interest, who'd taught them that worth was measured in contributions to community rather than accumulation of wealth. His meditation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into his driveway. Through the garage door's windows, he saw Alexa's Tesla, looking as out of place in his working-class neighborhood as his Honda had at the Marriott. She emerged from the car carrying coffee and a folder thick with documents, her usual corporate attire replaced by jeans and a sweater that made her seem less like a CEO and more like a neighbor stopping by for a conversation. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, offering him one of the coffee cups. "I was in the area and thought we could review the community feedback reports." "In the area?" Eli raised an eyebrow, accepting the coffee gratefully. "My neighborhood isn't exactly on the way to anywhere you'd normally go." "Maybe I'm expanding my geography," she replied with a slight smile. They spread the documents across his workbench, and Eli found himself watching Alexa as she studied the feedback forms with the same intensity she brought to engineering specifications. Her questions were sharp, focused on practical details that revealed her growing understanding of the communities they served. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a survey response. "Mrs. Chen says the mobile service unit saved her 2 days of work she would have lost getting her car to a traditional mechanic. That's not just convenience, that's economic impact we hadn't even calculated. It's also dignity," Eli added. She didn't have to ask for time off, didn't have to explain her financial situation to anyone, didn't have to feel like she was receiving charity. Alexa looked up from the papers, her expression thoughtful. "Is that how you felt when your in-laws offered to help with Leo? Like you were receiving charity?" The question caught Eli off guard, its personal nature a departure from their usual professional discussions. "They didn't offer to help," he said carefully. "They offered to take over. There's a difference. Tell me about them." Eli set down his coffee, considering how much to share. Their working relationship had developed professional trust, but this felt like crossing into more personal territory. Yet something in Alexa's expression, genuine interest, rather than casual curiosity, encouraged honesty. "Sandra's parents are good people," he began. "But they never thought I was good enough for their daughter. When she got sick, they blamed me for not being able to afford better treatment. When she died, they blamed me for not protecting her. And now they think Leo would be better off with them. Would he be?" The question was direct, almost harsh, but Eli heard the underlying concern rather than judgment. "Financially, probably. They have a house in the suburbs, college funds, all the things I can't provide. But Leo needs more than money. He needs to know that his father fought for him, that love matters more than bank accounts." Alexa nodded slowly. "My parents sold everything they owned to give me opportunities they'd never had. My father worked 3 jobs. My mother took in sewing. They sacrificed so much that I felt like I owed them success. Sometimes I wonder if I built this company for them or for me. Does it matter, as long as you built something good? I used to think it didn't, but lately I've been wondering if I lost myself somewhere along the way, if I became so focused on achieving their dreams that I forgot to figure out my own." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, reviewing surveys and budget projections while Leo played in the backyard, his laughter drifting through the open garage door. Eli found himself stealing glances at Alexa, noting how she'd relaxed in his space, how she seemed more herself away from the corporate environment. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Sure. When you stopped to help me that night, what were you thinking? What made you pull over?" Eli considered the question, remembering the storm, the split-second decision that had changed everything. "I was thinking about Sandra," he said finally. "About something she used to say, that the world doesn't need more people who look away, it needs people who pull over. She sounds like she was an amazing woman." She was, and she would have loved what we're building together. She always believed that good things happen when good people work together. As the afternoon light faded, Alexa helped Eli clean up the documents, their casual collaboration feeling natural, despite the strangeness of the situation. A billionaire CEO organizing papers on a working man's workbench Shouldn't have seemed normal, but somehow it did. "Eli," she said as they finished, "I want you to know that what we're doing matters. Not just the program, but the way we're doing it. You're teaching me things I never learned in business school." "Like what?" "Like the difference between helping people and empowering them. Like the importance of listening before deciding. Like the fact that the best solutions come from understanding problems, not just analyzing data." As she prepared to leave, Leo bounded into the garage, his face bright with the joy of a day spent playing outdoors. "Miss Cho, are you staying for dinner? Dad makes really good spaghetti." Alexa looked at Eli, a question in her eyes. "I don't want to intrude on family time." "You're welcome to stay," Eli said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "It's just spaghetti, but there's plenty." "In that case," Alexa said, smiling at Leo, "I'd love to try your dad's cooking." As they walked toward the house, Leo chattering excitedly about his day, Eli realized that somewhere between the corporate meetings and community visits, between the professional collaboration and personal conversations, something had shifted. He was no longer just Alexa's employee, and she was no longer just his boss. They were becoming friends, partners in something larger than either had imagined. And for the first time since Sandra's death, Eli allowed himself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there might be room in his carefully protected heart for something more. The family photograph sat on Alexa's desk like a secret, finally ready to be shared. For 3 years, it had remained hidden in her desk drawer, too painful to display, yet too precious to discard. Now, as autumn light filtered through her office windows, the silver frame caught the sun and cast gentle reflections across the mahogany surface. Eli noticed it immediately when he entered for their weekly progress meeting. The image showed a younger Alexa standing between an older couple, all three of them smiling with the unguarded joy of a family celebrating something special. The man's hands were stained with what looked like motor oil, and the woman wore an apron that had seen countless family dinners. "Your parents?" Eli asked, settling into the chair across from her desk. "My father's retirement party," Alexa said, her voice softer than usual. 3 years ago, he'd finally saved enough to stop working 18-hour days at the dry cleaner. Eli studied the photograph, noting the pride in the older man's weathered face, the way Alexa's mother's hand rested protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "They look proud of you." They were. "Ah," Alexa touched the frame gently. "My father taught me that engines are like people. They work best when all the parts support each other. My mother taught me that success without family is just expensive loneliness." "Why are you showing me this now?" Alexa leaned back in her chair, her usual corporate composure giving way to something more vulnerable. "Because I've been thinking about what you said about Leo needing to know his father fought for him. My parents fought for me, sacrificed everything they had, and I've spent so much time trying to justify their sacrifices that I forgot to appreciate them." She paused, looking out at the city beyond her window. "I haven't seen them in 6 months. I've been so busy building this company, preparing for the IPO, managing the board, that I've let the most important relationships in my life become casualties of my ambition." Eli recognized the pain in her voice, the guilt that came with realizing you'd prioritized the urgent over the important. "It's not too late to change that, isn't it? My father called last week to tell me my mother's birthday is next month. I didn't even remember. What kind of daughter forgets her mother's birthday?" "The kind who's human," Eli replied gently. "The kind who makes mistakes and learns from them. The kind who can pick up the phone and make it right." Over the following weeks, their conversations grew more personal, extending beyond corporate strategy into the territory of shared experiences and mutual understanding. Alexa began talking about her childhood, about parents who'd worked multiple jobs to pay for her education, who'd celebrated every academic achievement as if it were a family victory. "My father used to bring home broken appliances from his repair jobs," she told Eli one evening as they worked late in her office. "He'd spread them across our kitchen table and teach me how to diagnose problems, how to find solutions with limited resources. That's where I learned that innovation comes from necessity, not abundance." Sounds like he'd be proud of what you're building here, Eli said, reviewing the latest community impact reports. I hope so, but I think he'd be more proud of how we're building it. She gestured toward the photographs and testimonials covering her conference table. These stories, these families we're helping, this is what he meant when he said success should lift others up, not leave them behind. Eli's own walls were gradually coming down as well. During their dinner at his house, he'd found himself talking about Sandra in ways he hadn't since her death, sharing memories that brought laughter instead of tears, stories that celebrated her life rather than mourning her loss. She would have liked you, he told Alexa one Saturday afternoon as they visited one of the mobile service sites. Leo was helping the mechanics organize tools, his enthusiasm infectious among the crew. How can you be sure? Because she believed in people who fight for what's right, even when it's difficult. She would have seen what you're doing here and recognized a kindred spirit. Their personal connection deepened, but it also complicated the professional dynamics that surrounded them. Executive team meetings became exercises in diplomatic tension, with subtle undercurrents of disapproval regarding Alexa's growing reliance on Eli's perspective. I'm concerned about the precedent we're setting, Thomas Chen said during one particularly tense board meeting. Mr. Navarro's input is valuable, but we need to maintain appropriate boundaries between community outreach and strategic decision-making. What boundaries are those? Alexa asked, her voice carrying an edge that made several board members shift uncomfortably. Corporate governance boundaries, Richard Pemberton interjected. Mr. Navarro's background is in automotive repair and rideshare driving. Strategic planning requires expertise in market analysis, financial modeling, competitive positioning. It also requires understanding the customers we're trying to serve. Eli interrupted, his patience with corporate condescension finally exhausted. You can model market conditions all you want, but if you don't understand how real people make decisions about transportation, your models are worthless. The room fell silent, and Eli realized he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But instead of backing down, he continued, his voice steady and determined. I've listened to you debate our target demographics like they're statistics instead of people. You talk about capturing market share and optimizing penetration rates as if families choosing between car repairs and grocery money are just data points in your presentations. If that's strategic thinking, then maybe your strategy is the problem. Richard's face reddened with indignation. Mr. Navarro, I don't think you understand. I understand that 12 families in East Denver have jobs they wouldn't have lost if they hadn't had reliable transportation. Eli shot back. I understand that Maria Santos's son is learning skills that will help him support his family because we brought training to his neighborhood instead of expecting him to come to us. I understand that community trust is worth more than quarterly profit margins because community trust is what builds sustainable success. Alexa watched the exchange with growing admiration for Eli's principled stance and growing concern about the political fallout. The board members were powerful men accustomed to deference, not challenge, and their expressions ranged from shock to outright hostility. Perhaps we should take a short break, she suggested diplomatically. During the recess, Alexa found Eli on the building's roof terrace, staring out at the mountains that framed Denver's skyline. His shoulders were tense with the aftermath of confrontation, and she could see him questioning whether he'd just sabotaged everything they'd built together. You know you just declared war on half my board, she said, joining him at the railing. I know. I'm sorry if I've made things difficult for you. Don't apologize for speaking the truth. That's exactly what I hired you to do. Even if it costs us their support. Alexa was quiet for a moment, watching the afternoon light paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. My father once told me that you can measure a person's character by what they're willing to fight for when fighting becomes dangerous. You just showed me who you are, Eli Navarro. And who am I? Someone who won't compromise his principles for political convenience. Someone who sees people as people, not profit centers. Someone who remembers that businesses exist to serve communities, not the other way around. She turned to face him, her expression serious but warm. The board members in there are investors, not visionaries. They're important because they provide capital, but they're not irreplaceable. What you bring to this company, your perspective, your integrity, your connection to the communities we serve, that's irreplaceable. When they returned to the meeting, the atmosphere had shifted. The board members were more careful with their language, more respectful in their questions, but Eli could sense their underlying resentment. He challenged their authority and exposed their limitations, and corporate executives rarely forgot such slights. The meeting concluded with grudging approval of the expanded community outreach budget, but Eli left with the uncomfortable knowledge that he'd made enemies who would be watching for any opportunity to undermine his position. That evening, as he helped Leo with homework at their kitchen table, Eli reflected on the day's events. He'd stood up for his principles, defended the families they served, and spoken truth to power. But he'd also potentially jeopardized the opportunities those principles were meant to protect. "Dad, you look worried again," Leo observed, looking up from his math problems. "Just thinking about work stuff." "Is it about Ms. Cho? Miguel says you like her." Eli felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Miguel says a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're all true. But do you like her? Like her?" The directness of childhood cut through Eli's careful emotional defenses. Over the past weeks, he'd felt something growing between himself and Alexa, connection that went beyond professional collaboration, an attraction that complicated every interaction. But acknowledging those feelings felt like a betrayal of Sandra's memory, a step toward vulnerability he wasn't sure he was ready to take. "She's a good person," he said carefully, "and a good friend." "Mom used to be your friend before she was Mom," Leo pointed out with 9-year-old logic. "Maybe Miss Cho could be your friend who becomes something more." "It's complicated, buddy." "Why? Because she's rich and we're not." "Because I'm scared," Eli admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "Scared of letting someone get close enough to hurt us. Scared of changing what we have. Scared that maybe I'm not ready for something like that." Leo considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important topics. "Dad, when you taught me to ride my bike, you said being scared was okay, as long as it didn't stop me from trying. Maybe this is like that." Later that night, after Leo was asleep, Eli sat on his front porch and thought about his son's wisdom. In the distance, the city lights sparkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere among them, Alexa was probably working late in her office, driven by the same dedication that had built her company and drawn them together. His phone buzzed with a text from her. "Thank you for today, for standing up for what matters, for reminding me why we're doing this." He stared at the message for a long time before responding, "Thank you for giving me the chance to make a difference." Her reply came quickly, "We make a good team." "Yes," he typed back, "we do." But as he prepared for bed, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that their partnership, professional and personal, was about to face challenges that would test every foundation they'd built together. The board's resentment was just the beginning. In the corporate world Alexa inhabited, success created enemies, and enemies waited patiently for opportunities to strike. The photograph on Alexa's desk continued to catch the morning light, a reminder of the family bonds that sustained her through corporate battles. But photographs were also fragile things, easily broken when the storms of ambition and politics grew too fierce to weather alone. The custody court summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the impersonal efficiency of legal machinery set in motion. Eli stared at the official seal, the formal language that reduced his relationship with his son to a case number and court date, and felt his carefully rebuilt world tilt on its axis. Petition for modification of custody arrangement. The document read, "Petitioners Robert and Helen Morrison seek full custody of minor child Leonardo Navarro, based on substantial change in circumstances affecting the child's welfare." The substantial change, according to the 20-page filing, was Eli's new job. The Morrisons' legal team had documented his media appearances, his increased public profile, and what they characterized as his exploitation of Leo for corporate publicity purposes. They painted a picture of a father who'd sacrificed his child's privacy and stability for financial gain, a man whose judgment had been compromised by sudden wealth and attention. Eli's hands shook as he read their accusations, that he'd exposed Leo to inappropriate media scrutiny, that his new lifestyle was unstable and unpredictable, that his relationship with his employer represented a conflict of interest that compromised his parenting. They'd even included photographs from social media Leo at the Volta headquarters, Leo with Alexa in the design studio, Leo smiling proudly at his father's press conference. Every moment of happiness, every sign of Leo's thriving in their new circumstances, had been twisted into evidence of Eli's unfitness as a parent. His phone rang, and Margaret Chen's voice carried the gravity of a doctor delivering bad news. "Eli, I've reviewed the petition. We need to meet immediately." 2 hours later, Eli sat in Margaret's office, surrounded by law books and case files that represented other families torn apart by legal warfare. The attorney's expression was grim as she explained the implications of the Morrisons' strategy. "They're using your success against you," she said bluntly. "They're arguing that your new position has fundamentally altered Leo's life in ways that prioritize your career over his well-being. The media attention, the corporate events, the change in routine, they're painting it all as evidence of instability." "But Leo's thriving," Eli protested. "His grades are better. He's learning new skills. He's happy." "That doesn't matter if they can convince a judge that the risks outweigh the benefits. And Eli, they have resources we don't. They've hired Patterson Klein, associates the most expensive family law firm in the state. They're playing for keeps." Eli felt the walls closing in around him, the same suffocating sensation he'd experienced during Sandra's illness, when medical bills and insurance denials had made him feel helpless against forces beyond his control. "What are my options?" "We fight. But you need to understand what that means. They'll scrutinize every aspect of your life, your job, your relationship with Miss Cho. They'll try to prove that you're unfit, unstable, or that you're putting your career ahead of Leo's needs. My relationship with Alexa is professional." Margaret's knowing look suggested she'd seen enough family cases to recognize the signs of deeper connection. "Is it? Because if there's anything more than professional collaboration, they'll use it. A widowed father entering a romantic relationship with his wealthy employer, that's exactly the kind of narrative they'll exploit." As Eli drove back to Volta headquarters, his mind raced through the implications of the custody challenge. He thought about Leo's excitement that morning, his chatter about the science project he was working on in the after-school program, his pride in his father's work. How could he explain that everything they'd built together was now threatened by the very success that had made their lives better? Alexa was in her office when he arrived, and she took one look at his expression before closing her laptop and giving him her full attention. He handed her the custody petition without words, watching her face change as she read through the allegations. "This is outrageous," she said finally, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're using Leo's happiness as evidence against you. They're attacking you for providing him with opportunities." "They're not wrong about the media attention," Eli said heavily. "I did expose him to scrutiny he never asked for. I made decisions about our lives without fully considering the consequences. You made decisions about building a better future for your son. That's what good parents do." But even as she spoke, Alexa was processing the implications for herself and the company. The custody battle would inevitably drag Volta Motors into the spotlight, raising questions about her judgment in hiring Eli, about the appropriateness of their professional relationship, about whether the community care initiative was a genuine philanthropic effort or an elaborate PR stunt. Her phone buzzed with a call from David Kim. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "The Business Journal is running a story about Eli's custody situation. They're calling it the price of publicity when corporate gooders go too far." Alexa closed her eyes, understanding immediately how the narrative would unfold. The media that had celebrated their partnership would now dissect it, questioning motivations and examining every interaction for signs of impropriety or poor judgment. There's more. David continued. Richard Pemberton called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. He says the board needs to discuss the reputational risks associated with the current situation. After ending the call, Alexa found Eli standing at her window, staring out at the city with the hollow expression of someone watching their world collapse. She wanted to offer comfort, reassurance, promises that everything would work out, but she'd learned enough about his character to know he needed honesty more than false hope. "They're going to try to force you out," she said quietly. "I know, and maybe that's what's best for everyone. If I step away from the company, resign my position, maybe the Morrisons will back down. Maybe Leo won't have to go through a custody trial, and maybe they'll see your resignation as an admission of guilt, as proof that you made the wrong choice." Alexa moved to stand beside him at the window. "Eli, backing down won't make this go away. They started this fight because they think they can win it. Running will just convince them they're right. But what if they are right? What if I did put my ambitions ahead of Leo's welfare? What if I was so caught up in the opportunity to make a difference that I didn't think about how it would affect him?" "Then you're human," Alexa replied. "You're a parent who wants to provide for his child, who saw an opportunity to build something meaningful and took a calculated risk. That's not a character flaw, that's leadership." They stood in silence for a moment, both understanding that the next few days would determine not just Eli's custody of Leo, but the future of everything they'd built together. The community care initiative, their professional partnership, and the personal connection that had grown between them, all of it was now under attack by forces that saw their collaboration as a threat to established order. "There's something else you need to know," Alexa said finally. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." Eli turned to face her, noting the conflict in her expression. "The board has been discussing your position since that first meeting where you challenged their assumptions. Some of them see you as a liability, too outspoken, too independent, too willing to prioritize community needs over corporate interests. They've been looking for an excuse to recommend your dismissal. And now they have one. Now they have what they think is one. But Eli, I want you to understand something. What's happening to you, what's happening to yous, it's not because we made the wrong choices. It's because we made choices that threatened people who profit from the status quo." She walked to her desk and picked up the family photograph, holding it like a talisman. "My father once told me that the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fires. He said that if you're not facing opposition, you're probably not doing anything worth doing. And if the opposition wins, then we fight harder, we find allies. We remember why we started this, and we don't let anyone convince us that doing the right thing was wrong." She set the photograph down and looked directly at him. "But Eli, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "What? Are you willing to fight for this? Not just for Leo, not just for your job, but for what we're building together? Because if you are, if you're ready to stand up to the board and the lawyers and the media and everyone else who wants to tear us down, then I'll fight beside you. But if you're going to run, if you're going to let fear make your decisions, then I need to know now." Eli thought about Leo's question the night before, about being scared, but not letting fear stop you from trying. He thought about Sandra's belief that the world needed people who pulled over instead of looking away. He thought about the families they'd helped, the changes they'd made, the difference they could still make if they had the courage to keep fighting. "I'm willing to fight," he said quietly, "but I need to know that you understand what you're risking. Your company, your reputation, your relationship with the board, you could lose everything." "I could," Alexa agreed. "But if I don't fight for what I believe in, if I don't stand with people who share my values, then what's the point of having everything? My success means nothing if I'm not willing to risk it for something that matters." They shook hands, a formal gesture that sealed an informal pact. Whatever came next, custody battles, board challenges, media scrutiny, corporate warfare, they would face it together. They had built something worth fighting for, and they would not let it be destroyed without a battle. But as the late afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, both of them understood that the forces arrayed against them were formidable. The Morrisons had wealth and legal expertise. The board had corporate power and political connections. The media had the ability to shape public perception and destroy reputations. All Eli and Alexa had was the truth of their intentions, the evidence of their success, and the hope that sometimes, when good people stand together, justice prevails over politics and love triumphs over fear. It would have to be enough. The petition arrived at Volta Motors headquarters at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday, delivered by a process server who seemed almost apologetic about his mission. David Kim signed for the thick envelope with trembling hands, understanding immediately that the document inside would change everything they'd worked to build. Inside was a petition bearing thousands of signatures, community members, program participants, local business owners, and families whose lives had been touched by the Community Care Initiative. The cover letter, written in careful script by Maria Santos, the single mother whose car repair had been among their first successes, explained their purpose with simple eloquence. To the board of directors of Volta Motors, we, the undersigned, wish to express our support for Mr. Eli Navarro and the Community Care Initiative. Mr. Navarro and Ms. Alexa Cho have shown us that business can be about more than profit. They have restored our faith in the possibility that success can lift everyone up, not just those at the top. We ask you to stand with them as they have stood with us. The timing was perfect and devastating in equal measure. Tomorrow morning would bring the emergency board meeting where Eli's future with the company would be decided. Tomorrow afternoon would begin the custody hearing that could tear him away from Leo forever. The community's show of support was both a powerful testament to their work and a reminder of everything that hung in the balance. Alexa stood in her office, surrounded by legal documents, media clippings, and strategic plans that read like battle preparations. Her usual composure had been replaced by the focused intensity of a general preparing for siege. She'd spent the past week consulting with lawyers, public relations experts, and corporate strategists, building a defense that could protect both Eli's position and the company's mission. "The board wants your head," David reported, entering with yet another stack of phone messages. Richard Pemberton called 3 times this morning. Thomas Chen sent an email with the subject line, "Damage Control Imperative." They're treating this like a crisis that requires immediate amputation. "Let them," Alexa replied, her voice carrying steel forged in the crucible of corporate warfare. "They're about to learn the difference between a crisis and an opportunity." Her strategy was audacious and risky. Instead of defending against the attacks, she planned to go on the offensive. The board meeting would become a presentation of the Community Care Initiative's unprecedented success. The media criticism would be countered with community testimonials. The character assassination attempts would be met with facts, figures, and the kind of authentic story that corporate boardrooms rarely witnessed. But first, she needed to prepare Eli for what was coming. She found him in the community outreach office, a space they'd carved out of what had once been a storage room. The walls were covered with photographs of families they'd helped, thank you letters from program participants, and maps showing the expanding network of service locations. It looked more like a campaign headquarters than a corporate department, which was exactly what Alexa had intended. Eli was on the phone with Margaret Chen, his expression grim as he listened to his attorney's assessment of their legal position. "I understand," he said. "Yes, I'll be there early. Thank you, Margaret." "How bad is it?" Alexa asked as he hung up. "The Morrisons have a good case," Eli admitted. "They're not evil people, just people who genuinely believe Leo would be better off with them. And from a purely material standpoint, they're probably right. They can offer him stability, financial security, educational opportunities I can't match. And what can you offer him that they can't? The knowledge that his father never stopped fighting for him, the understanding that love isn't measured in dollars, the example of a man who tried to make the world better, even when it was difficult." Alexa moved to the wall of photographs, studying the faces of children whose parents had been able to keep working because their cars were running, of teenagers learning job skills through the program's training component, of families whose lives had been quietly transformed by access to reliable transportation. Eli, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. He looked up from the custody documents spread across his desk. If you could guarantee Leo's safety and happiness by walking away from all of this, from the job, from the program, from our partnership, would you do it? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went beyond the professional into territory they'd been carefully avoiding. Eli stood and joined her at the photo wall, both of them studying the evidence of their shared work. 2 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation, he replied slowly. Leo was the only thing that mattered, and I would have sacrificed anything to protect him. But now I realize that part of protecting him means teaching him that some things are worth fighting for, that backing down from bullies doesn't make them go away, that the work we're doing here, the people we're helping, the changes we're making, this is the kind of legacy I want to leave him. Alexa felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with professional admiration and everything to do with recognition of a kindred spirit. Even if fighting means risking everything, especially then. Because if I teach Leo that security matters more than principle, that comfort is more important than courage, then I'll have failed him in ways that have nothing to do with custody arrangements. That evening, they worked until past midnight, preparing presentations and gathering evidence like generals planning a two-front war. The boardroom battle would require corporate strategy and financial projections. The custody hearing would demand character witnesses and evidence of Leo's well-being. Both would need the kind of courage that came from knowing you were fighting for something larger than yourself. There's something else, Alexa said as they finally prepared to leave the office. Something I need you to know before tomorrow. Eli looked up from the files he was organizing, noting the vulnerability in her expression. I've been thinking about what you said about Sandra, believing in people who fight for what's right, about how she would have recognized a kindred spirit. Alexa's words came slowly, carefully chosen. I need you to know that this isn't just about the program for me anymore. It's not just about proving the board wrong or protecting my company's reputation. What is it about? It's about the fact that somewhere along the way, fighting for you became fighting for us. And I don't know when that happened or how, but I know that losing you would mean losing more than an employee or a partner. It would mean losing. Losing what? Eli's voice was gentle, understanding. Losing the person who reminded me why I started this company in the first place. Losing the man who taught me that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. Losing the possibility of something I didn't even know I was looking for. The office was quiet around them, the building empty, except for security guards and cleaning crews. In the distance, the city lights twinkled like promises of futures yet to be written. Alexa, Eli said carefully, you know that getting involved with me right now, with everything that's happening. I know it's terrible timing. I know it complicates everything. I know the board will use it against us, and the Morrisons will twist it into evidence of instability. She looked directly at him, her usual professional mask completely gone. But I also know that some things matter more than timing, and some risks are worth taking, even when the odds are against you. Eli thought about his conversation with Leo, about fear being okay, as long as it didn't stop you from trying. He thought about Sandra's belief in people who pulled over instead of looking away. He thought about the warmth that had been growing in his chest every time Alexa smiled, every time she challenged his thinking, every time she showed him that strength could coexist with kindness. If we do this, he said slowly, if we acknowledge what's happening between us, there's no going back. Tomorrow, when they attack us, when they question our judgment and our motivations, this will be part of what they use against us. I know. And you're willing to risk everything, your company, your reputation, your relationship with the board for something that might not work out. I'm willing to risk everything for something that already is working out, she corrected. Eli, what we've built together, professionally and personally, is the most real thing in my life. I won't let fear make me pretend otherwise." He reached for her hand, and she intertwined their fingers with the naturalness of something that had been inevitable from the moment they'd met in a storm. "Then we fight together," he said. "Whatever comes tomorrow, whatever they throw at us, we face it as partners." "Partners," she agreed, and the word carried weight that had nothing to do with corporate structures and everything to do with the kind of commitment that could weather any storm. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of Colorado day that made everything seem possible. Eli dropped Leo at school with extra hugs and reassurances that everything would be fine, while Alexa stood in her office, straightening her suit and preparing for the most important presentation of her career. The community petition sat on her desk, 4,000 signatures strong, representing families and individuals whose lives had been touched by their work. Each name was a reminder of why they were fighting, each signature a vote of confidence in the possibility that business could be about more than profit. David knocked and entered, his expression mixing nervousness with determination. "The board members are arriving. Richard and Thomas look like they're here for an execution. But there's something else there. Are people gathering outside? Community members, program participants." Word got out about the meeting. Alexa looked out her window and saw them dozens of people holding signs that read, "Support Eli," "Community Care Works," and "Thank you Volta Motors." Maria Santos stood at the front of the group, her teenage son beside her, both of them holding photographs of their repaired car. "They came," she whispered, feeling emotion tighten her throat. "They came for both of you," David corrected, "because you changed their lives, and now they want to change yours." As Alexa walked toward the boardroom, carrying the petition and her presentation materials, she felt the weight of responsibility that came with other people's hope. But she also felt the strength that came from knowing she wasn't fighting alone. In a few hours, Eli would stand in a courtroom, fighting for the right to remain his son's father. In a few minutes, she would stand in a boardroom, fighting for the right to continue building something meaningful. Both battles would determine not just their professional futures, but the personal future they'd begun to imagine together. And somewhere in the city, 4,000 people who'd signed a petition were proof that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, the community stands up with you. The war for their partnership, professional and personal, was about to begin. The Jefferson County Family Court felt like a temple built to broken dreams and second chances. Eli sat at the defendant's table, his hands folded carefully in his lap, watching as the Morrisons' attorney arranged her materials with the precision of someone preparing for surgical strike. Across the aisle, Sandra's parents looked older than he remembered, their faces etched with grief that had never quite healed and determination that had calcified into certainty. Judge Patricia Brennan entered with the measured pace of someone who'd presided over too many family tragedies, her expression neutral but her eyes alert. She'd read the case files, studied the evidence, and now faced the impossible task of determining what arrangement would best serve a 9-year-old boy whose life had become a battleground for competing definitions of love. "This is a hearing to consider the petition for modification of custody regarding Leonardo Navarro, age 9, Judge Brennan began, her voice carrying the formal weight of legal proceedings. "The petitioners, Robert and Helen Morrison, seek full custody based on alleged substantial changes in circumstances affecting the minor child's welfare." Margaret Chen rose first, her opening statement focusing on the factual evidence of Leo's well-being under his father's care. "Your Honor, the petitioners would have this court believe that a father's professional success somehow disqualifies him from parenting. The evidence will show that Leonardo Navarro is thriving academically, socially, and emotionally under his father's care." But when the Morrisons' attorney, Patricia Whitmore, began her presentation, Eli felt the ground shift beneath him. She painted a picture of a man whose judgment had been compromised by sudden wealth and media attention, a father who'd exploited his child's image for corporate gain, a widower whose romantic relationship with his employer raised questions about stability and priorities. Your Honor, Whitmore said, clicking through photographs projected on the courtroom screen, we see here a pattern of increasingly poor judgment. Mr. Navarro has thrust his son into the spotlight, exposed him to media scrutiny, and fundamentally altered the child's living situation to serve his own career ambitions. The photographs told a story Eli barely recognized Leo at Volta events. Leo smiling beside Alexa in the design studio, Leo proudly watching his father's press conferences. Every moment of joy had been recontextualized as evidence of exploitation, every sign of Leo's happiness twisted into proof of inappropriate exposure. Furthermore, Whitmore continued, Mr. Navarro has entered into what can only be described as an inappropriate relationship with his employer, Ms. Alexa Cho. This relationship, whether romantic or merely professionally dependent, creates an unstable environment that prioritizes adult needs over child welfare. Margaret objected, but the damage was done. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke, impossible to completely clear despite legal technicalities. When Eli took the stand, he felt the weight of every decision he'd made since that storm-soaked night. Whitmore's cross-examination was surgical, designed to expose every vulnerability in his armor. Mr. Navarro, when you accepted Miss Cho's job offer, did you consider how the media attention would affect your son? I considered how the opportunity would improve our lives, Eli replied carefully, but not the potential negative consequences of media exposure. Every decision involves risks. I weighed them against the benefits. And the benefits included a substantial salary increase, correct? From roughly $30,000 annually to $75,000? The salary was part of it, yes. So you prioritized financial gain over your son's privacy and stability? Margaret's objection was sustained, but the implication lingered. Whitmore continued, systematically dismantling the narrative of paternal devotion by reframing every positive change as evidence of compromised judgment. The turning point came when Leo himself was called to testify. Judge Brennan had arranged for a child advocate to be present, and the questioning took place in her chambers rather than the formal courtroom. But Eli could see his son through the glass partition, sitting in a chair that seemed too large for his small frame, answering questions about his life with the earnest honesty that made adults love him and lawyers fear him. Leo, the judge said gently, I want to ask you about your father's new job. How do you feel about the changes in your life? Leo's voice carried clearly through the courtroom speakers. I feel proud of my dad. He helps people now, like he helped Miss Cho that night in the rain. And people help us too, which is nice. Do you like spending time at Volta Motors? Yes, ma'am. There's a really cool design lab, and Miss Cho teaches me about how electric cars work. And there's other kids in the after-school program, so I'm not alone when Dad has to work late. Have you felt scared or uncomfortable because of the newspaper articles and TV news about your father? Leo was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness he brought to all important matters. Some kids at school asked me about it. But Miguelis, my neighbor Ray, told me that sometimes people say mean things about good people because they don't understand what's really happening. Judge Brennan leaned forward slightly. And what do you think is really happening? I think my dad is helping families like Maria's family get their cars fixed so they don't lose their jobs. And I think Miss Cho is teaching people that business can be about helping, not just making money. And I think some people don't like that because it makes them feel bad about not helping. The courtroom was silent as Leo's words settled into the record. His child's perspective cut through legal arguments and expert testimony with the clarity of someone who saw situations without adult complications. Leo, if you could make the decision about where you live, what would you choose? I would choose to stay with my dad, Leo said without hesitation. Grandma and Grandpa Morrison love me, and they have a nice house with a big backyard. But Dad is my family. He reads to me every night and helps me with homework and makes sure I eat vegetables even when I don't want to. He taught me that helping people is important, and now he gets to help people for his job. I'm proud of him. When the judge asked if there was anything else he wanted to say, Leo looked directly at the camera that connected him to the courtroom. I want to tell Grandma and Grandpa Morrison that I love them, and I know they want what's best for me. But what's best for me is staying with my dad. We're a team." Later, as character witnesses took the stand, Eli watched a parade of people whose lives had intersected with his own. Miguel Rodriguez spoke about Eli's dedication to his son and his community. Dr. Sarah Kim, Leo's pediatrician, testified about the boy's excellent health and emotional development. Teachers described a child who was confident, well-adjusted, and clearly loved. But it was Maria Santos who provided the most powerful testimony. She walked to the witness stand with the dignity of someone who'd survived hardship without surrendering hope, her teenager son watching from the gallery. "Mr. Navarro saved our family," she said simply, "not just our car, but our family. When my transmission failed, I was going to lose my job. My son was going to have to drop out of the community college program that was giving him a future. Mr. Navarro didn't just fix our car, he made sure my son learned how to maintain it, how to do basic repairs, how to take care of something important." She paused, looking directly at the Morrisons. "I understand that you love Leo and want what's best for him. But what's best for children is seeing their parents fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Leo's father does that every day." As the hearing recessed for lunch, Eli felt the emotional weight of the morning settling on his shoulders. The testimony had been powerful, but legal proceedings were unpredictable. Judges made decisions based on law and precedent, not just emotional appeals. Margaret joined him in the hallway, her expression cautiously optimistic. Leo was incredible up there. The judge was clearly moved by his testimony. But we need to be prepared for anything. Through the courthouse windows, Eli could see protesters and supporters gathering outside some holding signs supporting his custody rights, others calling for corporate responsibility and child protection. His personal battle had become a public symbol of larger conflicts about family, work, and the intersection of private life with public success. His phone buzzed with a text from Alexa. "Leo was amazing. The whole office is cheering for you both. Whatever happens this afternoon, know that you're fighting for the right reasons." He replied quickly. "How did the board meeting go?" "Still happening, but I'll tell you everything tonight. Stay strong." As they prepared to return to the courtroom for the afternoon session, Eli thought about Leo's words about being a team, about staying together through difficult times, about the importance of helping people even when it was hard. His son had articulated better than any lawyer why their family was worth preserving. The afternoon would bring closing arguments, legal technicalities, and Judge Brennan's decision. But in his heart, Eli knew that Leo had already won the most important victory. He'd shown everyone in that courtroom what love looked like when it was tested by adversity. The boy who'd written a school project about heroes was proving that sometimes the greatest heroism comes from simply telling the truth with courage and conviction. The Volta Motors boardroom had been transformed into a battlefield of corporate ideology, with mahogany and marble serving as unlikely witnesses to a confrontation that would determine the company's soul. Alexa stood at the head of the polished table, her presentation materials arranged like ammunition for a war she'd been preparing to fight since the day she'd hired Eli Navarro. The stock ticker on the wall screen showed Volta's share price fluctuating in real time, responding to news coverage of both the custody hearing and rumors of internal corporate strife. Every percentage point represented millions in market value, but Alexa had learned to measure worth in different terms. The families served, the communities strengthened, the lives changed by their work. Richard Pemberton sat at the far end of the table, his expression carrying the gravity of a man delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Alexa, the board has serious concerns about the direction of this company and the decisions you've made regarding Mr. Navarro's employment. The media attention, the custody controversy, the questions about corporate governance sets, all becoming a liability we can't afford. The community care initiative has exceeded every performance metric we established." Alexa replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing around her. "Customer satisfaction is at 94%. Community engagement has increased by 300%, and brand recognition has reached levels we couldn't have achieved with traditional marketing. Thomas Chen leaned forward, his tone carrying the patronizing edge of someone explaining reality to an idealistic child. Brand recognition isn't always positive, Alexa. The current news cycle is questioning your judgment, your priorities, and your ability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. The market is responding negatively. The market is responding to manufactured controversy. Alexa shot back. The same media that celebrated our partnership 3 months ago is now attacking it because it threatens established narratives about corporate responsibility and authentic leadership. She clicked to her first slide, displaying the community petition that had arrived the day before. 4,000 signatures from people whose lives have been improved by our work. Small business owners who've partnered with our mobile repair units, single parents who've maintained employment because their cars are running, students who've learned job skills through our training programs. That's all very heartwarming, Richard interrupted, but our responsibility is to shareholders, not to social welfare programs that compromise our market position. Our responsibility, Alexa replied, her voice rising with controlled passion, is to build a sustainable business that creates value for everyone it touches, shareholders, employees, customers, and communities. What we've built with the Community Care Initiative is exactly that kind of value creation. She advanced to her next slide, showing financial projections that painted a picture of long-term profitability built on authentic community engagement. The initiative isn't charity, it's smart business. We're building customer loyalty that will last generations, creating trained technicians who'll become our future workforce, and establishing market presence in underserved communities that our competitors ignore. But it was the human stories that formed the heart of her presentation. She told them about Maria Santos, whose son had learned automotive skills that led to a full scholarship at a technical college. About James Patterson, a disabled veteran whose specially adapted electric vehicle had restored his independence. About the Rodriguez family, whose small auto repair shop had become a certified Volta service center, bringing sustainable jobs to their neighborhood. These aren't just feel-good anecdotes, Alexa insisted. They're proof of concept for a business model that prioritizes long-term relationship building over short-term profit extraction. They're evidence that authentic corporate responsibility creates competitive advantages that can't be replicated by traditional marketing. The room was silent as board members processed her arguments, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. Finally, Thomas spoke, his words carrying the weight of accumulated frustration. Alexa, no one questions your passion or your intentions. But business isn't about intentions, it's about results. And the result of your decision to hire Mr. Navarro and build this initiative around his story is that we're now dealing with custody battles, media scrutiny, and questions about your judgment that are affecting our stock price. The result, Alexa corrected, is that we've helped 4,000 families while building a community outreach model that other companies are already trying to copy. The result is that we've demonstrated corporate leadership that goes beyond profit maximization to create genuine social value. Richard stood, his posture conveying the authority of someone preparing to deliver an ultimatum. The board has discussed this situation extensively, and we've reached a consensus. We believe it's in the company's best interest for Mr. Navarro to resign his position immediately. Furthermore, we recommend that the Community Care Initiative be restructured to remove the personal elements that have created these complications. And if I refuse, then we'll call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership. The threat hung in the air like a sword suspended by the thinnest thread. Alexa had built Volta Motors from nothing, had sacrificed everything to create something meaningful. But corporate boards had the power to remove even founding CEOs when they deemed it necessary. The conference room door opened, and David Kim entered with an expression of barely controlled excitement. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you all need to see." He moved to the presentation screen, pulling up a live newsfeed from outside the courthouse where Eli's custody hearing was concluding. The camera showed dozens of community members holding signs of support, their faces reflecting determination and hope. "The coverage is shifting," David explained quickly. "Local news is picking up the community response. Social media is rallying around the hashtag #StandWithEli. And there's something else." He switched to a financial news website showing Volta's stock price, which had begun climbing steadily as market analysts recognized the authentic community support as a valuable corporate asset. "The market is responding positively to the community demonstrations," David continued. "Investors are recognizing that the kind of grassroots loyalty we've built can't be purchased through traditional marketing. 3 different investment firms have issued buy recommendations based on our community engagement model." Thomas stared at the screen, his expression shifting from hostility to confusion to grudging recognition. "The stock price is rising?" 12% in the last 2 hours, David confirmed. "Apparently, authentic corporate citizenship is good for business after all." Alexa seized the moment, her voice carrying new authority as external validation supported her arguments. "Gentlemen, you're witnessing the difference between traditional corporate thinking and innovative leadership. While you've been worried about short-term reputation management, the market has recognized the long-term value of what we've built." Her phone buzzed with a text from Eli. "Judge decided in our favor. Leo stays with me. Thank you for everything." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by renewed determination. "The custody hearing is over." The judge ruled in Eli's favor, recognizing what the community already knew, that a father's love and commitment matter more than material advantages. She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. "Now you need to decide what kind of company you want Volta Motors to be. Do you want to retreat from meaningful engagement because it's complicated and occasionally controversial? Or do you want to lead an industry transformation that proves business can be both profitable and purposeful?" The silence stretched until Richard finally spoke, his voice carrying grudging respect. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we double down on the community care initiative. I'm proposing that we make Eli Navarro our Vice President of Community Engagement. I'm proposing that we stop apologizing for doing the right thing and start celebrating the fact that we've created something unprecedented in corporate America." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying the financial projections with new attention. "The numbers do support continued investment in the program." "The numbers support expansion," Alexa corrected. "Other cities are asking for similar programs. Community colleges want to partner with our training initiatives. Municipal governments are offering incentives for companies that demonstrate authentic community engagement." Over the next hour, the board meeting transformed from an execution into a strategy session. The same executives who'd questioned Alexa's judgment began suggesting ways to scale the community care initiative, to leverage its success into broader market opportunities, to position Volta Motors as the industry leader in corporate social responsibility. When the meeting finally ended, Alexa stood alone in the conference room, looking out at the city where Eli was probably holding his son and celebrating their victory. The stock ticker showed Volta's shares closing up 15% for the day, but the real victory was harder to quantify. They'd proven that authentic leadership could survive corporate politics, that community support could outweigh boardroom maneuvering, that sometimes doing the right thing was also doing the smart thing. Her phone rang, and Eli's voice carried exhaustion and joy in equal measure. "We won," he said simply. "We both won," she replied. "The board approved expanding the community care initiative. They want to promote you to Vice President of Community Engagement," and Eli apologized. "Actually apologized for questioning our judgment. So what happens now?" Alexa looked at the community petition still displayed on the screen, at the photographs of families they'd helped, at the evidence of what 2 people could accomplish when they refused to let fear make their decisions. "Now we get back to work," she said. "We've got communities to serve, families to help, and a company to build, together. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave the office, Alexa felt the satisfaction that came from battles won not through force or manipulation, but through the simple power of doing the right thing consistently, even when it was difficult. The war for their partnership was over. The work of building something lasting could finally begin. 6 months later, the autumn light streaming through the windows of Eli and Alexa's shared home caught the simple gold band that had replaced the complex corporate negotiations of their early relationship. The wedding had been small, intimate, held in the community center, where they'd first presented the expanded community care initiative to neighborhood leaders who'd become family friends. Leo sat at the kitchen table, his homework spread before him, but his attention focused on the small velvet box his father was nervously rotating between his hands. The boy's eyes held the knowing wisdom of someone who'd watched two adults discover that love could be both a choice and a destiny. "Dad, you know she's going to say yes, right?" Leo observed with 9-year-old logic. "She already said yes when you asked her to marry you. This is just asking her to marry you again." Eli smiled at his son's practical assessment of the situation. Tonight, he would formally propose to Alexanot because they hadn't already committed to each other, but because some gestures deserved the weight of ceremony, the acknowledgement that their partnership had grown into something that would last lifetimes. "Sometimes the important things are worth doing twice," Eli replied, slipping the ring box into his jacket pocket, "once for the decision and once for the celebration." The past months had brought changes neither of them could have imagined during that storm-soaked night that started everything. The Community Care Initiative had expanded to 12 cities, with waiting lists in dozens more. Eli's role as Vice President of Community Engagement had evolved into something unprecedented in corporate America, position that bridged the gap between boardroom strategy and neighborhood reality. Their personal relationship had developed with the same thoughtful intention they brought to their professional work. They'd moved in together gradually, respectfully, with Leo's well-being as the constant priority. Alexa had learned to braid Leo's hair for school picture day, while Eli had mastered the art of supporting Alexa through board meetings that still occasionally tested her patience. The custody battle had ended not just with legal victory, but with unexpected reconciliation. Sandra's parents, witnessing Leo's happiness and Eli's growth, had gradually accepted that their daughter's husband had become a man worthy of the trust she'd placed in him. They now spent holidays together, united in their love for Leo and their memories of Sandra. "Ms. Cho's here," Leo announced, hearing Alexa's car in the driveway. He jumped up from the table, his homework abandoned in favor of greeting the woman who'd become his second mother through patience, love, and the gradual accumulation of small kindnesses. Alexa entered carrying grocery bags and the satisfied expression of someone who'd spent the day solving problems that mattered. Her role as CEO had evolved too, shaped by the community focus that had initially seemed like a distraction from core business, but had proven to be the key to sustainable success. "How was the Detroit launch?" Eli asked, kissing her cheek as she set down the groceries. "Amazing. The community response was even stronger than we projected. 300 families signed up for services on the first day, and the mayor wants to discuss expanding our training program to include renewable energy jobs." Leo hugged Alexa around the waist, his head reaching just to her ribs. "Did you bring me anything?" "Maybe," she replied mysteriously, producing a small package from her purse. "But only if your homework's finished." "Almost finished," Leo said, returning to his math problems with renewed motivation. As they prepared dinner together, a routine that had become sacred in their blended family, Eli watched Alexa help Leo with fractions, while simultaneously fielding calls from community partners in Portland who wanted to discuss program implementation. She'd learned to balance the demands of corporate leadership with the rhythms of family life, finding strength in both rather than seeing them as competing priorities. "There's something I want to show you," Eli said after Leo had gone to bed, leading Alexa to the back porch, where they'd spent countless evenings planning programs, discussing challenges, and gradually discovering that their professional partnership had grown into something deeper. The October air carried the crisp promise of winter, and stars were visible despite the city lights, a reminder that beautiful things could shine even in complicated environments. Eli took the ring box from his pocket, his hands steadier now than they'd been earlier. "Alexa, 6 months ago you asked me if I was ready to fight for what we were building together. Tonight, I want to ask you something different." She looked at him with curiosity and affection, her expression open in the way it only was when they were alone, when the armor of corporate leadership could be set aside in favor of simple human connection. "I want to ask if you're ready to build something even bigger, not just a program or a company, but a life, a family. A future that includes all the challenges and complications and beautiful possibilities that come with choosing to love someone completely." He knelt on one knee, opening the box to reveal a ring that was elegant without being ostentatious, beautiful without being flashy, a reflection of the authentic values they'd built their relationship around. "Alexa Cho, will you marry me? Will you be Leo's mom and my wife and my partner in everything that matters?" Tears gathered in her eyes as she looked at the ring, at the man kneeling before her, at the future they could create together. "Eli Navarro, I thought you'd never ask. Again, is that a yes?" "That's a yes to everything. To marriage and family and building something beautiful together. To being Leo's mom and your wife and your partner in all the adventures we haven't even imagined yet." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, both of them laughed at the formality of a gesture that felt both necessary and redundant. They'd already chosen each other in boardrooms and courtrooms, through media storms and corporate battles, in quiet moments over homework help and late-night strategy sessions. "Leo's going to be so excited," Alexa said, admiring the ring that caught the porch light and scattered it in tiny rainbows. "He's been asking when you were going to make it official." "He helped pick out the ring," Eli admitted. "Apparently, he has strong opinions about what his future stepmom should wear." They sat together on the porch swing they'd installed the previous month, watching the city lights twinkle below them like earthbound stars. In the distance, they could see the Volta Motors headquarters, where they'd first discovered that professional collaboration could grow into personal connection. "Do you ever think about that night?" Alexa asked, her head resting on Eli's shoulder. "About how a flat tire changed everything?" "I think about how easily it could have gone differently. If I'd driven past, if you'd gotten your phone working, if either of us had been too scared to trust a stranger." "But we weren't," she replied softly. "We were exactly who we needed to be in that moment. You were the man who pulled over to help, and I was the woman ready to accept help gracefully. Everything that happened after that was just us being consistent with who we really are." The next morning brought the familiar rhythm of a family getting ready for their day. Leo wolfed down breakfast while peppering them with questions about wedding plans, insisting that he should be allowed to invite his entire class because everyone should get to see Dad get married to Ms. Cho. Alexa had learned to braid Leo's hair into the tight cornrows he preferred for school, her fingers working with the competence that came from months of practice. Eli packed lunches, including the handwritten notes that Leo had come to expect, small encouragements that would brighten his day when he discovered them at lunchtime. "Are you nervous about the company presentation today?" Eli asked as they prepared to leave for their respective offices. "Excited, not nervous," Alexa replied, straightening his tie with the casual intimacy of established partnership. "The board's finally ready to hear about our national expansion plans. All those months of proving ourselves locally are paying off." The presentation that afternoon marked a milestone neither of them had dared imagine during those early days of defending their partnership. Volta Motors' Community Care Initiative had become the gold standard for corporate community engagement, studied by business schools and replicated by competitors who recognized its effectiveness. The program has generated over $400 million in measurable economic impact, Alexa told the board, her presentation displaying statistics that told human stories in numerical form. Families who maintained employment because of reliable transportation, Students who gained job skills that led to better positions, communities that attracted new businesses because of our infrastructure investments. Richard Pemberton, who'd evolved from skeptic to supporter over the previous months, nodded approvingly. The return on investment has exceeded our most optimistic projections. More importantly, we've created competitive advantages that our rivals can't easily replicate. Community trust isn't something you can buy with traditional marketing, Eli added from his position at the conference table. It's something you earn through consistent action over time. We've built relationships that will sustain our business for decades. The meeting concluded with approval for a $50 million expansion that would bring community care to 30 additional cities within 2 years. As board members filed out, discussing implementation timelines and resource allocation, Alexa and Eli remained behind, both of them reflecting on how far they'd traveled from that emergency board meeting where his position had been threatened. "We did it," Alexa said quietly, looking at the financial projections that proved their vision had become profitable reality. "We're just getting started," Eli replied, gathering the presentation materials. "Detroit, Portland, and Atlanta are already asking about program modifications for their specific needs, and the community college partnerships are generating more interest than we can handle." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table with Leo chattering about his day at school, both of them felt the satisfaction that came from work that aligned with values, from success that lifted others instead of requiring others to fall behind. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Leo said during dessert, his expression carrying the seriousness he brought to important topics. "Always, buddy. Do you think Mom would be proud of what we're doing? The helping families and the car program and everything?" Eli felt his throat tighten with emotion, but it was the good kind of tightness that came from gratitude rather than grief. "I think she'd be incredibly proud, not just of the work we're doing, but of the man you're becoming and the family we've built together. And she'd like Ms. Cho." "She'd love Ms. Cho," Eli replied with certainty, "because Ms. Cho loves us and because she's helping us help other people." Leo nodded, satisfied with this assessment. "Good, because I think she watches us sometimes, and I want her to know we're okay." Later, after Leo was asleep, Eli and Alexa sat in their living room, planning the wedding that would formalize commitments they'd already lived into reality. The ceremony would be simple, meaningful, focused on community rather than spectacular reflection of the values that had brought them together. "I've been thinking about vows," Alexa said, curled against Eli's side on their couch, "about what promises we want to make to each other." "And what did you decide?" "I want to promise to keep pulling over, to keep being the kind of person who stops to help, who sees problems as opportunities to make things better, who chooses connection over convenience. I want to promise to keep building things that matter," Eli replied. "To remember that success isn't about what we accumulate, but about what we contribute. To be the kind of father and husband and partner who makes the world a little better." As autumn deepened into winter, their wedding day arrived with the clarity of Colorado sunlight and the warmth of gathered community. The ceremony was held in the same community center where they'd first presented their program expansion plans, surrounded by families whose lives had been touched by their work. Maria Santos served as Alexa's maid of honor, while Miguel Rodriguez stood as Eli's best man. Leo walked his father down the aisle with the pride of someone who'd watched love grow from friendship into family. Sandra's parents were there, having learned to see Alexa not as a replacement for their daughter, but as a woman worthy of the family their daughter had created. The vows they exchanged were simple and profound, promises to continue the work they'd already begun, loving each other, loving Leo, and loving the community that had supported them through challenges and celebrated their successes. "Today we're not just joining two lives," the officiant said as they exchanged rings. "We're celebrating a partnership that has already proven that love and work, family and community, personal happiness and social responsibility can strengthen each other rather than compete." As they kissed to seal their marriage, the assembled community erupted in celebration, not just of a wedding, but of the proof that sometimes, when two people commit to building something meaningful together, The whole world becomes a little more hopeful. The reception spilled out into the community center's garden, where Leo led other children in games, while adults shared stories about the program's impact on their families. It was exactly the kind of celebration that reflected their values: inclusive, joyful, grounded in authentic relationships rather than expensive displays. That night, as they finally arrived home as an officially married family, Leo presented them with a handmade card that brought tears to both their eyes. Inside, in his careful 9-year-old handwriting, he'd written, "Thank you for showing me that heroes don't just save people in movies. Sometimes they fix cars in the rain and help families and love each other, even when it's complicated. I'm proud to be part of this family." As they tucked Leo into bed, both of them kissing him goodnight in the routine that had become sacred, Alexa and Eli reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From strangers in a storm to partners in marriage, from a corporate crisis to a thriving social enterprise, from individual struggles to shared purpose. "No regrets?" Eli asked as they finally settled into their own bed, wedding rings catching the moonlight streaming through their window. "Only that it took a flat tire and a rainstorm to bring us together," Alexa replied, her hand finding his in the darkness. "But maybe that's how the best partnerships begin, with strangers helping each other when help is needed most." Outside their window, the city slept peacefully, unaware that somewhere in its heart, two people had proven that authentic love and meaningful work could coexist, that corporate success and community service could strengthen each other, that sometimes the simple act of pulling over to help a stranger could change not just two lives, but thousands of lives touched by the ripple effects of genuine compassion. Their story had begun with a single act of kindness in a storm. It would continue with countless acts of love in all the bright days ahead.